Before I begin, first of all, I always like to have a conversation. These are complicated issues that we deal with at WEMEAC and in the community, particularly around climate. So if at any point in the discussion you have a question, you have a comment, you want to dig a little deeper on a topic, please feel free to jump in. Second, I'd like to hear from you about and get a sense of where you are on climate issues. What are you concerned about? How are you facing this issue in your own lives? What are your questions? What are you curious about? I'll take some of that information, and as I move through my presentation, I will try and connect those pieces and threads and weave them together a little bit. So tell me what you're thinking about climate. Julia. Great.
I think another question is, what is it going to take and how many people is it going to take working together to actually?
I saw another.
How to leverage technology.
Yeah, great question. A couple others.
I think just like like international policy and stuff.
Yeah.
Is a big part of convincing, China and India and stuff to, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the development of the third world, and that's an interesting topic I'll touch on. In the back?
Too late?
Is it too late? And one more in the back.
When you hear people talk about the globe can't be warming because it's so cold outside, I know the long way around to that answer. How do we more quickly answer that to the skeptics and naysayers?
Sure. So the polar vortex. Okay, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I always try and be as relevant as possible because we do only have, I don't want to say we only have a little bit of time, but we've got to get our boots walking in the same direction on these topics. And the faster we move, the more likely my children, who are 5 and 4, are going to be able to enjoy the Great Lakes in the same way I have throughout my childhood. The more likely they will have a balanced lifestyle and a quality of life that doesn't burden them. So these are the things that motivate people, and that's my primary job. I want to tell you a little bit about WEMEAC. I love this picture of WEMEAC activists smoking in the forest in 1970. It always makes everyone laugh, but WEMEAC has a long history. We were founded in 1968 by a woman named Joan Wolfe, who was a member of the Audubon Society. And she came into awareness, along with many other citizens of the community, of what really formed the modern environmental movement in West Michigan and in the United States, and that was growing concerns about the chemical industry and the pervasive use of chemicals in society. So you'll recall that in the 40s and the 30s, we had in 20s, we had some significant wars. Out of those wars evolved chemical technology. Those individuals Men who were working in the war industry came home from war and began to integrate chemicals into our everyday lives. And much like the internet is the new economy for the 21st century, chemicals were kind of like this innovation, this technology, and drove a new economy at the turn in the middle of the 20th century. So we started to see chemicals introduced into food systems, right? We learned how to make things like Hot Pockets. We also saw the pervasive use of chemicals in agriculture and in our communities. Here in Michigan at the time, in the late 60s, Dutch elm disease was a major issue. Trees were dying in neighborhoods. And what were municipalities doing to fight Dutch elm disease? Does anybody know? Say again? Well, there was some cutting down. Before that, they were spraying DDT in neighborhoods. Everybody know what DDT is? Really, really toxic chemical. There are pictures from East Lansing and scientists at Michigan State University of trucks literally going down residential streets, spraying DDT, and kids in bathing suits running behind it like, wow, it's the sprinkler, this is the coolest thing. and then of course the next, over the course of days in these neighborhoods, the birds would die. They would be found on the ground. It was, this particular moment was the spring of 1967, I believe. Scientists at MSU started to collect these birds and started to really inform and deliver the science of the work that Rachel Carson had laid out in her 1964 book, A Silent Spring. So Rachel Carson, being, many call her the mother of the modern environmental movement. So citizens in Grand Rapids were inspired by this work. They were compelled, and they founded one of the first environmental action organizations on the planet. That led to successfully filing suit to ban the use of DDT in the United States, a case that went to the Supreme Court. The citizens who founded WEMIAC established the Michigan Environmental Protection Act, which was the first of its kind. It then led to the National Environmental Protection Act and similar acts in states across the United States. We established the Michigan Lakes and Streams Act and worked on the Clean Water Act. And WEMIAC was also this great incubator for environmental law. Joe Sachs was teaching law at University of Michigan and beginning to explore environmental law and the idea of the commons. The idea of the commons is that things like water and air and public lands belong to all of us, not just one of us, and so we must be able, as citizens of a place, to be able to defend the commons, right? So these young lawyers who are just retiring now, attorneys like Peter Steckedy and Herb Ranta and others, if any of you know them, Bob Eleveld and Mark Van Putten, they were practicing and experimenting with environmental law in Michigan and trying cases and seeing how the Clean Air Act would be defended, how the Clean Water Act would be defended throughout the 70s. And it's a really, really fascinating time and moment. Today, our work is focused on leading environmental protection in West Michigan by inspiring action. And of course, inherent in that is you. We really help to facilitate citizens and community members identifying the issues that they care about most and then bringing communities together to make change happen. We do that around protecting water and around building resilient communities. And we are designed to be on the front line, to take new issues and articulate them for broader audiences and then to mobilize people in the places that they are at, to make change in their personal lives as well as their communities and society as a whole. And so today's challenge is, of course, climate change. It's a pervasive one that cuts across all parts of society. And where are we? The folks at 350.org really define this pretty well. They've identified that we need to be a healthy planet can have up to 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide. We are at 400 parts per million. We have exceeded the goal. And we are adding 2 parts per million of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere every year at this point. So unless we are able to redesign our lives, redesign our communities, and rapidly turn that around, and when we say rapidly, we're talking about over the next 20 years. Some people say less, and some emerging science is indicating that we might have overshot the goal and we need to be even more aggressive than this. But if we don't turn these indicators around, we risk triggering tipping points and irreversible impacts that will change our lives extraordinarily and create outcomes that we can't predict. So that's pretty depressing. And an equally depressing book, Naomi Klein, This Changes Everything. Has anybody read this yet? Okay, so this is the new hot book in the climate change movement. And Naomi is a woman of spirit who I appreciate. She, like me, doesn't like to put any icing on the cake. She's pretty real. And she points out that capitalism is failing our climate, no surprise. That the idea of constant growth and continually growing our economic footprint and our economic presence is not sustainable and it isn't working. She points out that the big environmental organizations, the big folks, the Nature Conservancy, the Sierra Club, etc., they have been lying down with lions, and when lions and lambs lie down with each other, who's going to get eaten? So she brings up the criticism of the major environmental movement itself, and she also cuts at the throat of all of these global meetings we keep having that are she's asking the question, are they effective? Are we getting anywhere? Or as a result of failing to really hold accountability in the space of climate and climate responsibility for countries across the world, we are committing ourselves to failure and committing ourselves to climate doom. So she paints a pretty depressing picture. She does, like all good environmentalists and activists, she turns it around at the end and gives you some hope. But this is real. This week we had a wonderful woman join us. Her name is Nikki Silvestri, and she's an activist from Oakland, California. She's been in the green movement for about 10 years, and most recently she worked for an organization called Green for All, which works on green and blue jobs in Oakland, California, and environmental justice. Before that, she was at the People's Grocery. She was really driven into the climate movement through food and her family's history with food. And what we know about climate is that it disproportionately impacts marginalized communities, people of color, and low-income persons. And so it becomes very important that we look at environmental justice and that we begin to mobilize all people in the environmental movement. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history about the environmental movement. Oh, I lost my slide. As a whole. And I'm also going to talk about environmental justice and how the conservation and environmental movement itself needs to be held accountable to these issues. So I'll come back to the climate resiliency report. The environmental movement in the United States starts at the turn of the 20th century. And I have this picture because I wanted to kind of display and bring some threads in about how creatives have informed and shaped the environmental movement. So this is a piece, the Hudson River Valley artists. Does anybody remember their art history classes, right? So in New York, this group of really brilliant painters were capturing these very dramatic and beautiful images and compelling images of the Hudson River Valley. And that brought on an awakening of, the beauty of place. And with the growing population at the turn of the century and industrialization, people started to become aware that we needed to protect places. And so the beginning of the environmental movement is rooted in conservation. Last year at the Environmental Funders Network, the network shared an award with the Rockefellers for all of their amazing work on protecting places. And in a very awkward moment in the environmental community, the Native Americans in the back of the room stood up and they recalled to us that these places that we have protected were first their places and that they had been taken from them. And so we have the first piece of an environmental justice issue, and we are enlightened in this space that the environmental movement started out by taking things from people. It's interesting that when we look at our national parks today, we have issues around lands laying fallow because they have not been used by the Native people in the way that their communities synchronistically used lands in order to inform their growth and their protection, and to keep those ecological systems working. And so we have soil erosion in our native parks because we haven't burned our prairies and we haven't trampled our seeds, and our soil is deteriorating in our national parks. And that's because those places haven't been used, and for 100 years they have not been part of the really intricate ecology of people and place and the history of people and place. And no big surprise when you think of it through the lens of that moment at the Environmental Funders Network, right? Then we move in to the modern environmental movement. Rachel Carson is pictured here. I mentioned her, Silent Spring. Has anybody read A Silent Spring? Couple heads nodding, and great to see that. Rachel Carson was a poet first. Her bachelor's degree was in English, and it was through writing that she discovered the natural world and its beauty, and again the intricate webs of ecology that are so fascinating, and that compelled her to go back and get a master's degree in biology, and then she became one of the first women in the Fish and Wildlife Service. So how did the environmental movement, the modern environmental movement, fail all people? Well, you know that the modern environmental movement is about pervasive pollutants, and it's about chemicals in our environment. And you also know that that people in cities are disproportionately impacted by pollutants, and particularly people of color. So at the same time that we began to build awareness around this, people with power and wealth were creating NIMBYism, the attitude that, that incinerator, we need that incinerator, we have all this technology and all this wealth to build this incinerator, but it's not going to go in my backyard. It's going to go over there in their backyard. And so the environmental movement created a dynamic that then put communities without as much power in harm's way. And they found themselves surrounded by industrial waste and landfills and incinerators, and as people of wealth and people with power defined that, you know, they knew they didn't want their kids growing up around this. They pushed that stuff out into other communities, and so we have the second environmental justice issue emerging as it relates to the environment. And today, I bring all of this up because today we are moving into the climate space, and I point out, you know, the Herman Miller chair there, and the great work of the furniture industry here in Greater Grand Rapids to deliver sustainable business practices and cradle-to-cradle design. This is really, really important work, and it is the work of creatives in the new economy, the clean, green economy, in the climate economy. When we started doing our climate resiliency report, go back to that, in 2012, we were asked by Mayor Hartwell to start to look at climate resiliency and its impacts in Grand Rapids. We, particularly on municipal practices. So we got a little award. Ironically, it was from Walmart. It was the only check I've taken from Walmart. And we talked to 45 local experts who were rooted in climate science and in working in various fields related to climate. We worked with GVSU's Environmental Studies program and a professor of geography and planning to gather and model localized climate data with temperature and precipitation. Dr. Elena Lebustamaveva, Elena. She's brilliant. She's at GVSU. Did that work. And so we identified that our community will see a 4-degree temperature rise. We identified the impacts of that. And what are climate impacts in the Midwest and the Great Lakes region? Increased volatility and the number of extreme heat events is one impact. We will see a distribution and intensity of precipitation events producing more than 2.5 inches of rain at a time. So we've seen these big, intense rainstorms. We've seen these big, intense snowstorms. A decreased total precipitation in summer and potential increases in winter. Increased seasonal volatility. That makes me recall the spring of 2012 when our crops started in March, and then we had freezes in April, and the entire apple and cherry crops were lost up and down the fruit belt. And we put together a series, we defined climate change, and we put together a series of recommendations. So the report defines climate resiliency as the ability of a community to simultaneously balance ecological, economic, and social systems to maintain or increase quality of life in an uncertain and dynamic future. And our recommendations to the city, I'll just highlight a few of them. You can, I have a little card with the website so you can download the report if you're interested in reading more. But Grand Rapids needs a climate resiliency champion, a group of individuals working in organization to focus the community on the implementation of best climate practices. We need to support policy proposals to increase energy efficiency and clean energy at the state level, county level, local level. We need to explore legal, policy, and economic frameworks that enable the city of Grand Rapids to build an autonomous energy system. We have to study and implement new methods of street maintenance and construction, and thus WMEAC advocated for vital streets when we did our last tax extension. Vital streets are clean green, and complete streets. We need to change the transportation culture. So I'm thrilled to be here at the Rapid, and my friend Brittany's in the back of the room hooking it up, changing the culture. Thank you. We need to capture the first flush of precipitation. This is stormwater. If we can capture the first inch of stormwater in our communities in place where it falls and enter that water back into nature rather than into infrastructure, we will be more resilient. We need to pursue water efficiency efforts because here in the Great Lakes, we have, of course, taken for granted our access to fresh water, but even here we're experiencing droughts. Isn't that shocking? In Ottawa County, as a result of overuse of water, their groundwater system has dropped 1,000 feet. Farmers are pulling up brackish water, and it's a result of poor agricultural practices and overuse of the groundwater system. Pretty scary in a community that takes our access to fresh water. 20% of the world's fresh water surrounds us, and we're still dealing with drought. We need to improve the quality of the Grand River and its tributaries, restoring them to a more natural state. And we need to adopt a strong urban tree canopy goal. So these are some of the key aspects of moving the city of Grand Rapids forward, and for that matter, moving all cities forward. Mayor Hartwell has been part of President Obama's Climate Resiliency Task Force, and we have been thrilled to discover that our report is one of the most comprehensive in the country, looking at 22 different municipal functions. So we're in a good place here. We're thinking ahead, but Grand Rapids is not an island. Grand Rapids is surrounded by a myriad of communities. We're in a watershed that is 3,300 square miles and has 18 different municipalities in it and local governments. So Grand Rapids itself can do all that it can, but if we aren't dealing with climate resiliency in the city of Wyoming and the city of Kentwood, the city of East Grand Rapids and beyond, then we're failing ourselves. And that's a place where we can become civically engaged in really raising a groundswell to move the entire region forward and not just thinking about the city of Grand Rapids itself. The other most important thing that we discovered about climate resiliency is that because the environmental movement has in their, I like to talk about the road we pave on the way to hell, right? We have good intentions, but our good intentions put gold bricks in this paved path to a terrible place. And the environmental movement is one of those movements that has done a lot of damage in the midst of doing good. And that has left us in a place where when the environmental movement speaks, we are speaking and representing one piece of the population in the United States, and that is upper middle class, well-educated white people. We have not brought alongside of us people of color. We have not made a place for them in the movement. Dr. Dorsetta Taylor at the University of Michigan did a study recognizing that the data on leadership in the environmental movement, leadership representing people of color, representing women, is terrible. It's terrible. It's embarrassing. So in 2012, WEMEAC started our IDEAL initiative. It stands for Inclusion and Development of Environmental Allies and Leaders. You can check it out. Again, I have this piece available for you. And we have, over the last 2 years, been doing deep listening work and working through an intentional process to begin to engage with people, all people in our communities, and to face our programs in that direction. So So that was the impetus of bringing in Nikki Silvestri for Women and Environment. This is the reason why we are substantially growing our watershed education program, because in targeting school districts that disproportionately serve people of color and minorities in our community. And this is probably the most important aspect of climate change from my view as a social scientist and a leader in policy. Making sure that it's just not people who look like me who are empowered to speak their concerns. Asthma rates across the country have over the last 10 years, they've increased by 50%, and they disproportionately impact African American children. And so if our governments, if our policymakers, if our medical community is not hearing solutions, self-identified solutions from the African American community who is disproportionately impacted by this, then we're not going to get it right. We're not going to solve those problems. If we are not understanding how to protect our lands through the lens of Native people who did that work for hundreds and thousands of years, if they are not defining for us how to take care of our national parks and our public spaces, how to take care of the Grand River and the Great Lakes, then we have an issue in front of us. So these people have to be brought back into conversation and listened to and acknowledged, and those are the voices that should be leading climate resiliency in our communities. So what is next? That's a great question as well. Clean energy. In Michigan, we have distracted ourselves on the clean energy conversation with these big turbines. I love them. I think they're so beautiful. I love the aesthetics of turbines. But a lot of people don't. And so over the last 10 years, we've focused our debate on clean energy around wind. Are we going to have wind offshore on Lake Michigan? Are we not? Are we going to have wind in agricultural communities? Are we not? But we've forgotten that solar is another option. And in the meantime, solar has become incredibly affordable to deploy. So I have one of my favorite establishments, the Pyramid Scheme here. They've recently installed solar panels. And Tammy Vandenberg and Jeff Vandenberg are two of my heroes for living their truth every day. This is an example of what needs to happen all across Grand Rapids. Every building should have panels on top. Yes, we need to have wind. We need to have utility scale wind to power our lives. But you know, we're used to these huge monolith energy systems, and what we need to build are energy systems in place, what we call decentralized energy systems, where pockets of energy are developed right where they're used. We lose 50% of the energy that we create moving it from, in our case, the lakeshore here to Grand Rapids. So if we can create energy in place, we are able to deploy it in place, we're able to reduce our consumption right there. Community planning and investment is critical. So we've been starving our communities in Michigan and in other states across the country. We have been having this big debate about small government versus big government, this polarizing, toxic set of discussions that have distracted us from what really needs to happen. We have to rebuild our streets to capture stormwater in place and to provide more transportation options for people that aren't dependent on automobiles. We need to invest in these decentralized energy systems. We need to invest in rewilding our urban communities. I'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. bringing nature into our urban communities so that we can be more resilient. And we need to think hard about developing walkable, livable urban spaces so that we can stop the trend of sprawl. Because sprawl is impacting our economy, our environment, and our society in incredible ways. And the food movement is important. The last picture here is one of my favorite places, the Fulton Street Farmers Market, elbow to elbow in a food-loving people traffic jam on a Saturday morning. Food is another enormous opportunity for each of us as individuals. The production and consumption of meat and moving food from one part of the country to another to the market, or moving food from Chile to Michigan to market, represents about 50% of our global climate impact. Food alone. So living locally, using local foods as much as possible, supporting local farmers, and really being thoughtful about your consumption of meat is a critical step forward. There are lots and lots and lots of really great infographics and information about the food web and the production of meat and its impact on climate, and that conversation is rapidly growing. So I encourage you to really think hard about your food choices and rethink them, and then rethink them again. And behavior change is tough, right? How many of you have changed a behavior recently? Couple? Anybody willing to share their struggle with behavior change? Cody?
I cut out meat about 3 months ago after watching some stuff, but it's been tough, but it's, I'm living the life, always eating meat, growing up on a farm, so dealing with people kind of questioning you and why, explaining that to them over and over, where it becomes tough to me, living the life on themselves is bad, but
Right.
explain why.
Yeah. In the back of the room, I saw somebody. Was it you?
We cut out meat about a year and 4 months ago, and it's actually been quite easy and enjoyable.
Good.
We found a lot of really good alternatives and loves for beans and nuts and eggs for our protein sources of soy products.
Word.
Great.
Awesome. Congratulations.
I, about 3 years ago, started eating meat again after being a vegetarian for 8 years. And because I actually started to be unhealthy because I had a hard time finding alternatives. Now, what I realize is that my consumption needs to be also mindful. So, trying to eat mostly organic, and local farms and stuff like that has been difficult, but trying to do it as much as I can.
Thank you.
So yeah, just bringing consumption down as opposed to cutting it out completely.
Great. It's
Thank you, boss,
word. Awesome. You got some fists in the air behind you. I don't know if you see them. That's great. Who's biking more? I am. Got a few folks. And who is thinking more consciously about local food? Going to the farmers market more. Yeah, good. And you're going to restaurants as well that support local farmers. Great. And what are you discovering? You feel better?
The food's better.
The food is way better. Way better. Anything else?
There's more and more options each year.
Yeah.
Something that's growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel more deeply connected? Yeah, I see some heads shaking. So you feel better, you're more deeply connected to community. Any other benefits? Are you seeing, I always think that behavior change is a series of dominoes, right? You start using canvas bags at the grocery, and then all of a sudden it becomes easier to make better food choices, and you become more thoughtful about consumption in general, right? So, as you coach your friends and your family, as you talk to them, I have learned best not to overwhelm. Find people where they are and coach them into that space. Be supportive, be positive about it, and they'll find their journey into all of the other pieces and parts of living a climate resilient lifestyle. I think that's incredibly important. So where do we need you? Right now we are working on a fracking moratorium in the city of Grand Rapids. Again, cards and things over the table. You can grab this one with the pedestrian bridge to learn more about that. We need to mobilize the city commission around this. We're not just working in the city, we're also working in Ada, Virgins, Cannon, Cascade, and myriad of townships, with the goal of moving through all of the townships and municipalities throughout the watershed. But here in Grand Rapids, the moment is now to contact your city commissioner or the mayor and support them in this decision. And in the middle of March, we'll start to see the question move to the city's agenda. So March 17th, there will be a public hearing. March 24th, I think, is a vote at City Commission on a fracking moratorium for the city of Grand Rapids. Grand River restoration. How many of you have gone to some of the downtown design input meetings? A couple of folks. The restoration of the Grand River is critical from a climate perspective because of two things. One, managing flooding. We have opportunities through the design of the Grand River as it goes through downtown to better manage flooding and therefore to be more resilient to the onslaught of more intense and more frequent rain events that we will continue to see into the future as a result of climate change. Second, this is an amazing opportunity to integrate wildlife corridors and native plants and to do this, what I'm starting to call rewilding of bringing nature back into the city. And we need leadership from the design community in that space. Because the criticism of rewilding of native plants is always aesthetics. But what's more beautiful than nature and its intricate web of ecosystems, right? So bring us that voice. Let's talk about that. Think about, as we design this space and as you have opportunities to provide input to the redesign of downtown and the river corridor, think about the places where we can let nature do its work. Goal number 2 is restoring the Grand River as the draw to downtown. What is more compelling than being at the 6th Street Bridge and seeing a heron roll up with its gorgeous, gracious wings up the Grand River? It's really, those are the stunning moments, right? Let's bring nature back. Protecting our dunes and the lakeshore. How many of you live in Grand Rapids so that you can go to the lake? That would be me. I moved all the way from Detroit so that I could go to Lake Michigan and not have a combined sewer overflow issue impact my experience. Having grown up in Detroit, it's hard to enjoy a day on the lake there. And our dunes, this is a globally unique ecosystem. You can not find a freshwater dune system like ours anywhere in the world, anywhere. World-class beaches, amazing experiences. But developers are threatening those spaces every day of every month of every year. And so we really have to work hard on dune protections and on balanced development along the lakeshore. Discover climate solutions. Look at sustainable and resilient practices at home, in the community, in your work. Integrate them into your work for clients. Begin to help clients to see how they can take these steps, how they can message around these issues. I want you to be cautious about, the green screen and not being authentic in this place, because that is dangerous. but you in the design community have these really amazing ways to articulate what is new and what is next, and to help companies understand their role in delivering products to communities that are sustainable and resilient. So I think that you have a lot of power in that space. If you want to get involved in climate policy, we have a citizens group working out of the WEMIAC office, the Citizens Climate Lobby. They're networked with people across the country who are coming up with really amazing solutions to move both Republicans and Democrats forward in the legislatures, and to make sure that the United States is achieving solutions. So if you're interested in that, I have a sign-up sheet on this table, and I would encourage you to just write in the notes Climate Lobby, and I'll get you connected to Jim, who is leading up the Climate Lobby work. And we talked a little bit about what you're doing and what you're going to do. We have a community through our green drinks events that meets every month. Nobody will proselytize, but they will maybe buy you a beer. And so Green Drinks is a really great place to access networks of people who are working on sustainability and resiliency, and I encourage you to enjoy that. We also have an event coming up to support our watershed education programs, the Blue Tie Ball in April. I hope you can join us for that. I want to answer a couple questions I didn't get to. The polar vortex and how to quickly respond to people who are throwing snowballs in Congress, like Mr. Emhoff, one of my favorite peeps. So all you have to do is look at the airstream in the United States right now. So go to your weather page and capture a picture of the airstream, and you see that the airstream right now is, the cold air is moving across the upper western states, Washington, Idaho, and then it dips way, way, way down into Texas and into the southern states in this really dramatic arc. And if you are to, Google a weather map, an airstream map from, 1990, and you'll find the healthy airstream, right, which kind of cuts across the middle of the U.S. in a little bit of an arc, but it's not as dramatic as the arc that we're seeing right now during these winter months. And the airstream is created by currents and wind and warm air forcing cold air into different places, right? And so the airstream map is this really poignant example of how our airstreams are dramatically changing. And then I also like to talk about the evaporation of the lakes as well. So although that argument is starting to fail because the lakes are freezing over again as a result of the polar vortex, but until recently, between the 1970s and let's say 2011, the lakes were not freezing over at all. I happen to know because my grandfather raced bikes on the ice in Detroit way back in the day, that the lakes would freeze over all the time in the old days. And so the whole idea that we have more snow and so there is no climate is actually counterintuitive. The reason why we have more snow is because the lakes are warmer, more water is evaporating into the air and then falling on our communities, particularly in the western snow belt in Michigan. So more snow is climate. More snow is precipitation. More precipitation, more intense and more dramatic precipitation events. Does that make sense? A couple of good tools for you there? Good. Technology. I recently posted the amazing work that Portland is doing. They're changing up all of their water pipes with these pipes that are generating energy. Holy shit. That is so cool. Technology is constantly evolving, and it's through technology that we're going to be able to leapfrog these problems. And so, again, in the creative space, in the design space, in the tech space, where all of you sit, there is this powerful, powerful moment to identify new technologies and to readily accept them. We live in this culture that distrusts new technology. Let's get over that. We've gotta try some stuff. This is a moment when, just like our society, rose to the moment when we had to defend ourselves from the axis of evil in the 1940s. This is a moment when we should be mobilized to use our fear and our concern for our planet and our lives and move our communities forward together rapidly, synchronicitously, to address the biggest thing that is impacting us right now, which is climate. This is the social issue of the next 50 years. And is it too late? No, it's not. We've got time, but we can't be complacent anymore, and we have to deal with our fear. And that is a place where calling all of you to be emotionally intelligent and self-aware, and to acknowledge those places where you're fearful about change in your world and in your life. And instead of drowning them in Taco Bell and visits to the mall and mass consumption and all of the things that we do to distract ourselves from our reality, face those fears and discover your own solutions, the solutions that work for you, that work for your family, and that work for your community, and spread those solutions forward. I think my time's about up. Any questions, concerns, comments?
What is your view of nuclear energy? Can it be a valuable tool, or are the risks too great? You see what the disaster?
I believe that clean energy is the solution, and I don't believe that fossil fuel consumption is a bridge to anywhere except the decline of our societies. That includes nuclear as well as gas and you name it, whatever new fossil fuel technology that is emerging. In particular, in the Great Lakes, I think we have a crisis in front of us. We have 50-year-old nuclear plants that are very poorly regulated. Just like the oil industry regulates itself, essentially, the nuclear industry regulates itself. And there's this constant movement between the companies like Entergy that create nuclear power and the regulatory space of people and talent and minds, right? And we are very concerned about the nuclear plants that are adjacent to the Great Lakes, that use the Great Lakes for cooling, particularly those that are older, like Palisades, which is in the South Haven area. And we are even more concerned about the movement of radioactive waste across the Great Lakes for storage, and the fact that all of the nuclear waste in the Great Lakes Basin is stored in adjacency to the Great Lakes themselves. So that's kind of stupid. I mean, it's just common sense. Why would you place nuclear waste within proximity to the world's largest source of fresh water? That's dumb. Yeah.
Speaking of water, can you touch upon a little bit about the current state of water and thinking about the comments that you spoke of that earlier?
Yeah.
Especially in light of what happened in Detroit this year and shutting off water.
Yeah.
In other areas of the U.S., Arizona, where
Yeah.
we'll be facing, very complex water issues.
Right.
Especially in Michigan, is it our duty? Is water right? Where are we at? Where are you at in that conversation, especially being from Detroit?
Yeah. So 150 years ago, we built an enormous amount of water infrastructure, and it's under the ground, and we don't see it, and therefore we don't think about it. So just like trash goes to a landfill and we forget that it's a problem, water rolls through our systems that are declining, that need a significant amount of investment, and we've forgotten about it. So now we're in trouble because all of that infrastructure is declining at a rate that our municipalities, who are strapped for cash, can no longer continue to invest. And the infrastructure is just becoming more and more and more expensive. So yeah, water is a right. It's a human right. The water of Michigan is in the Great Lakes is partially protected. Our surface waters are in the public trust, and what that means is any water that you can ride in on a boat. If you can get on a boat and be in water, that water is protected as part of the public trust, and all of us have the right to defend it. Although that's arguable because of some case law, but I'm not going to dive deep into that. Our groundwater is not protected. It is not in the public trust. And that was a loophole created by the Granholm administration in 2008 when we were working on the public trust for the Great Lakes with all of the eight Great Lakes states and Canada. Some states in the Great Lakes Basin have protected their groundwater, not all. And in particular, when we are seeing, okay, so then we look at the national picture and the global picture on water. And we know that farmers in California, which is the breadbasket of the United States, the cornucopia, where most of our food is produced, they are struggling to produce food because they don't have access to water, and they're in a historic drought, and that drought is likely linked to climate. And woo. And then great.
Sorry.
Can you hear me well enough just with my big girl voice? So all of this agricultural production is moving where over the next 20 years? Where do you think agricultural production is going to move? Overseas, and where else? Right here. So the potato growers who grow potatoes for all of our French fries at all of our fast food spots just bought 13,000 acres of land in the Upper Peninsula, and their agricultural withdrawals from groundwater resources exceed a frac. So a frac is 20 billion gallons of water, and these guys are pulling that much water out every day. A portion of it goes back into the system as it drains back into the groundwater aquifers, but a large portion of that water is being shipped out in all of those potatoes. And we're going to see more and more and more of those large-scale land purchases for large-scale agriculture, big ag in Michigan. Agriculture is already the number 2 driver of our economy in the state of Michigan. So we're poised. We have the infrastructure, we have the land resources, and most importantly, we have the water. So we really have to get on top of this groundwater issue now. And further, water is going to be the thing that brings all of my best friends back to Michigan. They are in LA, they are in San Francisco, they are in Bend and Portland and in Washington State. And I've just been telling them, buy a house now, and I got this nice little neighborhood for you because soon enough they will no longer be able to afford a water-rich lifestyle, and companies and people will start to return to the Great Lakes. And so we have to be prepared for massive population growth in the Great Lakes as well over the arc of the next 20 to 40 to 50 years. That's a great question. Thank you, Maria.
I'd like to have one more question, and then
Okay.
More, and then we're going to wrap up.
Great.
You mentioned data on carbon dioxide. Do you have any data in this area in Michigan for methane and how much methane is being entered into the atmosphere?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm sorry I don't have any data. There was a recent study in, I think, Arizona, looking at methane emissions and their impact on the ozone layer, and it's not good, and it is a serious question. Our legislature is a lot of things. Our legislature is methane hungry, so they want to pull methane out of our landfills. They want to frack, which is a methane-heavy fossil fuel extraction, and so that is absolutely something that we need to be looking at. Thank you. I'll start asking the question. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions, your dialogue. Lots of ways over here to get connected to our work, and we have a wonderful website thanks to our communications director, a creative in-house at WEMEAC, Josh Leffingwell. You can go to wemiac.org and find out more. Stay connected. We're on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and I think we do Instagram too. And we'd love to see you at our events and at our meetings. Please find ways to get involved. Thank you.
Another round of